very good morning. You're watching Media Monitor with me, Alicia Jali. Here's what we have for you this morning. We start by unpacking South Africa's decision to quit the International Criminal Court. We delve into the fees must fall saga. Is there an end in sight to the police brutality and these protests? We ask whether the Hawks have a solid case on Trevor Manuel. Will Police Minister Nathi Nhleko retract his criticism of Parliament over its handling of Ipid head Robert McBride's inquiry? And finally, we ask, are we sensing a bit of hostility between Busisiwe, Mkhwebane and Thuli Madonsela? All that's coming up here on the show. But first, as always, it's 900 hours and these are your news headlines. Parliament's legal advisors have started to contact some of the witnesses who will be called to testify in the SABC inquiry into the board's fitness to hold office. Now that's according to Chairperson of Parliament's Portfolio Committee, Mkhwebane. About 26 witnesses are expected to be called to testify. Some farmers affected by black frost in the Brede Kloof Wine Valley in the Western Cape say they've lost up to 90% of their vineyards. A drop in temperatures to below zero caused vineyards to develop a blackened appearance. It's been described as the worst in more than 2 decades. Agri Western Cape says it's currently assessing the extent of damage there. The family of SAFA Technical Director Neil Tovey has thanked members of the public for their support since he was admitted to a Johannesburg hospital. Tovey suffered a heart attack during training a week ago and he was taken to hospital where he was placed in intensive care. His brother Mark Tovey says he will be discharged from hospital very soon. Well, I'm surrounded by gentlemen this morning. Let's welcome my guests. They are political economy analyst, Mr. Zamakaya Maseti, and political analyst, Mr. Levi Ndo. Gentlemen, a very good morning. Thank you so much for being here.
A very good morning and thank you very much for having us.
Levi.
Morning, Alicia.
Thank you so much. And now a quick look at the big hashtags of this week. And for this segment, we're very pleased to be joined by another SABC digital news producer. I'm talking about Mr. Neil Motlong. Neil, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, Alicia. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. A very busy week in digital space. Do take us through some of the big things that were happening on the digital front.
It's been a big week from Fees Must Fall. Now we're looking at Dlamini,
the big case.
He was in court on Tuesday and was denied bail. This is what happened on social media. About 2 million people. The account has reached 2 million people, and that within 18 hours. And it has over 2.3 million impressions on social media. So that's a big topic on social media. But also we know another student leader was shot. Apparently people are saying 10 and reports are saying 13 bullets, and people are talking about her on social media a lot. If you can read the tweets, let's go to the tweets and see what they say.
I mean, 2.342
is a
huge number.
It's a huge
and it's
number
a huge topic as well. I mean, thinking about the Fees Must Fall protests, they are currently going on and it doesn't seem like there's an end in sight. And I'm going to get a comment from the gentleman there, but I just want to see if we can get those tweets there and see what people said on social media about this.
I mean, as you can see, absolutely nothing justifies Shaya Kale being shot at 13 times at the back with rubber bullets. I mean, this has happened a lot. I was covering Fees Must Fall also, and I was shot with rubber bullets last week. So yeah, it was one of those things that was making news on social media. Shaya Kale and all the other victims of hashtag Vets Police Brutality will be in my prayers forever. So people are really giving support to the Fees Must Fall. I mean, there's been a mixed reaction on social media, of course.
You know, gentlemen, we're going to talk about this, but let's talk about, the digital space and how these protests have actually been received. Zamaka, what has been your reaction to how people have reacted on social media?
Well, social media is an instrument of mass mobilization nowadays. For instance, I remember during the British riots, which were related to what we have now, the Fees Must Fall. The movements were controlled through social networks. In Libya, for instance, during the downfall of Gaddafi, there was no nuclear, so you couldn't see who were the forces behind the campaign, but the social media forces were leading that campaign. But there are very, very serious weaknesses in using social media as a form of mobilization organization, it has its own weaknesses, precisely because you can't identify leaders. Hence, some of these actions can easily be hijacked by reactionary and criminal elements. So that's the downside of this instrument.
Levi, you're going to have a say in this topic in the next segment, though. But now take us through the next story and take us through what happened with the story.
This will be the ICC. I mean, it was
another story we're covering
It
here.
was a major topic on social media with activists putting in their voice. But this is from this morning. People are still talking about it. Close to 500,000 people. The topic in South Africa has reached, and that's within 4 hours. And when you look at the hours, it's in the morning, so people are really talking about this
people
topic.
People are up and talking about this.
Yes, it's a big topic, and close to 600,000 impressions on social media. So people are really. It's a big topic.
What have been some of the tweets that came through, though, Neil?
This guy basically talks about it's an embarrassment for us. I mean, our latest foreign affairs embarrassment. We are pulling out of the ICC. People are really not happy with the decisions. That's why even other activists were coming out on social media saying, this cannot happen. And every African country, this is a different opinion, and every African country should just leave the biased International Criminal Court, if only
it persecutes Africans.
Yeah, people have that perception that it's African leaders who are persecuted, that are targeted. So that's why some of them are
one
supporting.
More tweet. I think we have one more tweet there. No?
Yeah. Why is it that joining the international court, the criminal court, is so easy and requires no global attention, but leaving it is a tool of mayhem to Africans? People are saying that. Why can't we just basically move out?
That's a great question. It's like the Brexit. Hey, Levi?
Yeah. Well, Alicia, on this one, we will obviously get mixed reactions.
Yeah.
But then let's go back to what happened during the AU summit, because that is one thing that actually influenced this kind of a decision. MPs were actually differing. Some were saying, no, let's continue our participation in the ICC, and others were saying, no, there is a resolution that has been adopted by the AU to actually not cooperate with the ICC.
Yeah.
So obviously we'll get all these mixed reactions, but I think you need a very sober government to sit down and say, what then are we supposed to decide or do that is actually going to benefit South Africa at the end of the day?
I think, Alicia, the most important point about South Africa's withdrawal is that it brings into sharp focus democratization of UN institutions and multilateral organizations. For instance, for long, Africa has been calling for the democratization of the United Security Council, and those guys, they just don't listen. And you can see the hegemonic role that is played by the United Nations and all these multilateral institutions. So I think to us, we have to go back to our own instruments, African peer review mechanism, make sure that we strengthen those institutions. The African Union will have to make sure that most of these countries, they subscribe and join the African peer review mechanism so that we can police our own leaders.
Zamakai, we're going to get more views on that because we do have that topic as a main topic on our show. Now, a very quick one. What was this topic all about?
Busisiwe Mkhwebane. I mean, there's been...
She's still popular.
She's still popular. There have been so many reports on social media, but if you look at the timeline, the tweets are going down. And this is in 2 days, over 600K tweets have been reached. Close to 1 million, actually, impressions on social media. So, I mean, there's been a lot of reports on, in the media, so people are really talking about the state capture, number one, and the allegations that are followed by the Gupta family. So people are really interested in this topic.
And what are they saying in terms of interest?
The tweets that we've gathered during the week are very negative. I normally give people the benefit of doubt on their new task, but this one, I have a bad feeling about her public protector. And some people are calling for, when are we getting the new public protector? This one says that...
We've just got one.
Yes. So the only
4 days in office.
So they only appointed a new public protector to trash the old one. So people are really not on her side.
Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much. We'll probably see you again next week. Gentlemen, you're going to have a lot more to talk about after this break. We're going to take a quick ad break, and after that, more Media Monitor. Do stay with us.
information-hungry viewers stay with SABC News, as issues on the West are different from issues on the East or here in Johannesburg. So it is not surprising that people who follow the news know that there are two things for sure: that anything can happen, and SABC News will tell you when it does. Because we keep the nation fully informed. We are SABC News.
Welcome back. Now, the South African government has carried out its threats of withdrawing from the International Criminal Court, even though it signed, ratified and domesticated the Rome Statute through the Rome Statute Implementation Act of 2002. At a media briefing on Friday, the Minister of Justice and Correctional Services, Michael Masuta, confirmed that correspondence to this effect has been signed by Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Minister Mkhwebane, and dispatched to the United Nations Secretary General, confirming South Africa's withdrawal from the ICC. Now, this comes after similar overtures by Kenya and an overwhelming vote of withdrawal by Burundi. And despite this intention to withdraw by the South African government, Parliament still has to vote to repeal the Rome Statute Implementation Act. Now, reactions from various political parties are in this insert.
The sooner we exit ICC, both as a continent and as a country, better for Africa to consider its own issues, that African issues, they need African solution. And I think the sooner we extricate ourselves from imperialist institutions, the better for the African continent.
Our commitment to the advancement of human rights, both in the continent, locally and internationally, remains unwavering. We continue to participate in mediation efforts.
The decision can't just be, it has to come to the Parliament of South Africa, and we must ensure that it deals with the legislative process there. But we believe the decision is wholly irrational. It seeks to hide those who have committed heinous crimes against our people.
And now that the intention has been made clear publicly, it behoves us in Parliament to deal with this matter thoroughly. And we've asked that the Speaker convene, place on the programme, the item of national urgent public importance.
I believe it is unconstitutional. I believe it is unlawful because the Rome Statute, which sets up the International Criminal Court, has been accepted into our domestic law by an Act of Parliament. Only an Act of Parliament can revoke that.
This is very bad for South Africa for various reasons, but one of the most important reasons is that it will send a signal to the international community that we are not a responsible international citizen, and that will be bad for foreign direct investment in South Africa, because people will think twice to actually invest in South Africa.
Africa must be out of that institution. It's not it is inconsistent and it's not serving the African interest.
Gentlemen, I first want to hear your reactions as well. Levi, let's start with you.
Well, I think this is quite a difficult moment for South Africa, and that is why you're also getting mixed reactions. There are those in South Africa that are in support of South Africa's withdrawal, and those that are not. But I think as well, hence I said earlier that you need a sober government that must sit down and look at a variety of issues. Another aspect will be to say, we might continue to participate but ensure that we transform these institutions that seem not to be transformed in our favor. But also another view will be to say, for how long do you have to sit down and participate in transforming these systems? Because there is an element of resistance, especially by the Western countries. And that is actually frustrating on the part of the African countries. But another view is that there is a perception that seeks to suggest that the ICC only targets African leaders. And I think that is one serious area of concern. And that is why some of the countries are saying, like South Africa, let's then not participate in these institutions, but then We need to establish our own institutions where we're going to deal with the violators of human rights.
What do you think?
Well, I think the main challenge for us as Africans is to make sure that we tighten our own institutions. You know, the ICC disappointed me during Charles Taylor's period. President Thabo Mbeki was centrally involved with President Obasanjo. But you look at how the ICC undermined that process, which was AU-driven, driven by African leaders trying to find a common solution to this problem. But look at where we are. They arrested him as he was crossing the borders. And you ask yourself, you know, African leaders are committed to an initiative, and then you come using your powerful instruments of infiltrating countries and arrest a leader whilst they were busy trying to manage that process. So I think as Africans, we have to make sure that our own institutions respond to some of these challenges. And we must find a way of dealing with our own dictators, those who are slaughtering innocent Africans. So we have to make sure that we promote, you know, democracy in Africa and put systems in place to make sure that those who are butchering our own people ultimately face the
full might of the law.
The full might of the
but
law,
gentlemen, I mean, let's talk about the process then of withdrawal. I mean, we heard earlier on, a lot of people are saying there's so much noise about the withdrawal, but when you sign on, literally nobody knows, I mean, what the processes were. Levi, what can you tell us?
Well, apparently the process has to be very long. But I think with the South African government, what they then have to do, like the leader of the Democratic Alliance was saying, Parliament has to first, our leaders must first sit down and say, yes, we agree on the withdrawal. But then obviously there are other processes that has to follow at an international level. But then until those processes are complete, we'll still remain as members of the ICC.
Look, I mean, this is very interesting because this is actually happening all during the fact that there was still a court process that was actually involved in regards to al-Bashir.
Yes, and I remember that the South African government lost the appeal. But I think the main challenge here is when it reaches our national legislative chamber, that is the National Assembly. And unfortunately, the ANC as a ruling party that doesn't command a two-thirds majority. So it remains to be seen how those legislators will be able to deal with this situation. If it fails, then unfortunately we'll have to go because we have to respect our own constitutional processes. A decision has been taken at a political level, but it will have to be tested in Parliament. If it fails, sadly, we'll have to go back to...
Let's expand on that point, Zabakai. I mean, you spoke about this earlier, but now I want to understand solidarity with the continent. Can this influence our international relations, and how? Levi?
Well, I think it mainly depends. Yeah, I think it depends on the priorities that we've set ourselves as a nation. We have, as South Africa, have been playing a very, very influential role in international relations. But the focus has shifted to focus mainly on Africa. But now when you look at the al-Bashir case and how South Africa has been pressurized to arrest him, it had a potential to affect negatively the relations that we have with our own African countries. And I think that is what, when South Africa then said, we can't compromise the solid relations that we have in Africa, because if they'd arrested al-Bashir, it would have negatively affected their relations. But then also at the same time, you also need Western countries, other countries as well, to pursue in pursuit of your international agenda. But then that is why South Africa then had to choose to say, at this point, we're choosing Africa, and we're actually going to side with Africa and not abide by what is actually requested from us.
It's very interesting.
You know, the most interesting point is that the United States of America, which is hegemonic in all these multilateral institutions, is not a signatory to this Rome Statute.
And that was the big question.
To me, it gives me some degree of comfort. In terms of our bilateral relations with individual countries in the European Union and elsewhere in the world, I don't think this will affect our trade relations and other diplomatic protocols that are in place. But I think we must really make sure that as Africans we are united around our common African agenda. The new Africa NEPAD, it's one program which in my view is disarticulated by these leaders. And we need to go back and define or strengthen some of those perspectives which emerge as part of NEPAD. So we've got our own, for instance, relations with BRICS. I was very, very inspired when the Philippines president decided to cut ties with the US and he moved towards China and Russia. So there is a shift in terms of global relations, and most of the developing countries now are beginning to realign with the former East. So, to me, those are some of the subtle battles that we must begin to understand and position ourselves as Africans. So these global dynamics and shifts are very, very important. And if we play our game well, they will count towards our favor. Now they're talking about the BRICS rating agency. We don't know whether that will be something that we can... The one thing that I don't like about these rating agencies is that they are using those neo-colonial ways of controlling Africa. Your IMF, your World Bank, do this, if no. So we're back to those old days of the IMF and World Bank. Hence, I'm supporting such radical initiative emerging from the smaller countries.
So we're not being decolonized. Is that what you're saying, Zavika? Let's have a look at the tweets and hear what you're saying on social media. Tandegile says, hashtag the ICC are effectively seeking a license to kill. RSA, quit them. Tabo Matlinyana says, why did SA sign to be hashtag ICC in the first place? I mean, it's now haunting at my ANC. Hashtag Bubulango says, ICC, why? Aren't there other countries still in the ICC, or is it only for Africa? Last but not least on this topic, Tony Santana says, heads up, if we give hashtag ICC the boot, will the AU also stop asking I can't see the rest of that tweet, all right, but Tony Santana, we thank you so much for your views here on the show. We're going to take a quick ad break, and after that, will the fees fall? Well, the saga continues. Please stay tuned.
If you look at artists, they've got one of the abilities to either form new conversations, they can paint a picture of a country, they can paint a picture of a mindset of a country.
The Cape Town-based ballet dancer recently won at the 2016 and 2017 Rolex Mentor and Prodigy Arts Initiative.
South African hip-hop right now is sitting at a level where it's Ngutu, Yippee and Roller. When you put them all in one room, you actually have like the ultimate super South African fan.
And you're watching Trends, do not go anywhere, stay right there.
Catch Trends for that 1 hour weekly dose of arts and entertainment news every Saturday from 12 to 1.
Welcome back. Well, so much has happened this week regarding the Fees Must Fall protest action. Details emerged of the Fees Must Fall leaders at Wits being targeted by police. Police Commissioner Khomotso Phahlane said 567 people have been arrested in connection with the violent protests at universities across the country since the 1st of February this year. Police reactive response to students has also been widely criticized after the student leader was hit with more than 10 bullets, and her shooting and claims of police brutality are now the subject of an independent police investigative directorate probe. Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan has been added to the ministerial task team on higher education. But here's more on this insert.
Protesting students clashed with security guards at the Wits Medical Campus after they tried to disrupt lecturers there. But police intervened. Students at the Wits main campus marched to the Hillbrow police station following the arrest of 4 students. They are demanding their immediate release.
We know it's a Friday afternoon and we don't want our comrades to spend the weekend in prison. Earlier on today, we also visited Mkhwebane, former SRC president. He's in high spirits. His word for all of us is not just encouragement, but to hold the ground.
Meanwhile, Wits student leader Shahira Kala is still recovering in hospital. She was shot 13 times with rubber bullets on Thursday. The Independent Police Investigative Directorate is now probing the matter. Overnight, 2 vehicles were set alight. In the Western Cape, charges against 9 of the 34 UWC students have been withdrawn. They were charged with public violence and malicious damage to property. Among those remanded in custody is a student who was charged under the Explosives Act. This after being found in possession of a petrol bomb. At UKZN, students say their Fees Must Fall campaign has been derailed. They claim police are targeting student leaders, forcing them to abandon the protests. In PE, police are investigating the cause of a fire at a building at the Nelson Mandela University. The 33 students and staff members arrested on Wednesday were each released on 100 Rand bail. They had been charged with public violence, malicious damage to property and undermining the court interdict. A series of events in support of the Fees Must Fall campaign are planned for this weekend. They include a parents' meeting and a music concert at the Constitution Hill in Johannesburg. Nozintombi Mia, SABC News.
Gentlemen, the big topic here has been how the police have been reacting to the student protests. Let's start with you, Mkhwebane. What do you think is the problem here? How should police be reacting to the violent protests at varsities?
I think we have to start with the students and their methods of engagement. They need to understand that they are not like us, the generation of the 70s, the generation of the 80s, which was fighting against an unpopular apartheid regime. Now they are dealing with a democratic state which has been elected overwhelmingly over years. So in engaging with the state, they need to change their strategies and tactics. For instance, the destruction of university infrastructure, centers of knowledge like libraries, those things are not justifiable. And also the police, they have to make sure that now equally they deal with the riots differently. They can't use those old apartheid tactics. Rubber bullets, they open up wounds. What happened to those tear gases, the water? There are quite a number of water cannons, alternative ways of managing or dispersing crowds. So here I think we have to deal with the question of, well, of course, proper policing, and also the students, they will have to change their strategies and tactics in terms of engaging the democratic state. You really cannot ban a building. Of course, we've inherited these institutions from apartheid, but now we have to make sure that we transform them. So this reckless violence, in my view, is counterproductive from both sides.
Levi?
Yeah, well, I think you need students that are able to engage. You need student leaders that are able to sit down with their managements and provide their views and argue with their different managements in order to get a solution.
Dialogue.
I was a bit disappointed that in a number of initiatives where students are being invited, there are some students who totally reject to go and sit down and have a formal discussion. That to me is a bit disappointing. But also I think, adding on what Zamkhaya was saying, the strategies that students are using at times really are just not acceptable. You know, each time you hear about students strike or students marching, there will be smoke somewhere. And I think we need to get the student leaders themselves to come out and say, we're totally opposed to the burning of buildings. We're totally opposed to the burning of buses. We're totally opposed to the looting of shops. Because the very same people that they're busy disturbing whilst they're striking are the very same people that they need support from, you know. Johannesburg came to a standstill some few days ago because students were busy looting in different shops. I think that is totally unacceptable. But the students' demand really is quite reasonable, and I think they want education. You're seeing young people want to be educated, and they need these resources from government to assist them. But really the strategy is to change so that...
Alicia, let me declare my stance. I support them 100%. I was once a student leader. I faced personally financial exclusion. I saw my friends facing academic exclusion. What this Fees Must Fall movement unearthed is that lack of transformation that since 1994, we have not been able to address. These kids are talking to, for instance, the curriculum. You hardly hear in any, for instance, I was engaging some students. When I asked them about the comparative economic systems, I realized that the only thing that they understand is capitalism. They don't know that there was once a socialist system, you know, your Swedish social democratic system. So when you talk about transforming curriculum, you have to speak to those issues. When you talk about social sciences in Africa, we've got great African scholars and leaders here, Mkhwebane, Nkrumah. The latest that we have in South Africa that we are proud of is Thabo Mbeki. To what extent do they engage with him at a theoretical level? So when you talk about this decolonization of our own education, but the weakness in their struggle is that they've got this, what I would call this reductionist approach to decolonization. The fact that we had Marikana today, it told us, or it showed us, that for more than 300 years the mining sector has not transformed. The conditions of the working classes they were in 1921 during the Rand Revolt of 1921 is no different to what we witnessed in Marikana. So when we talk about this decolonization project, we have to make sure that we take the society with and begin to attack those sectors of the economy which have not transformed. The mining industry, you talk about education. You know, we inherited a neo-colonial setup, and we have to find a way of making sure that we're getting out of that system. But they need to move with the society at large. The trade union, for instance, us as professionals, we have to be involved in this campaign. It can't be just narrowly reduced to higher education. So they need to make sure that as they conceptualize this campaign moving forward, they are clear in strategies and ensuring that we move with them as a South African society. Because the issues that they are dealing with are some of the issues that as student leaders we dismally failed to address when we're still leading this student organization.
You know, we can never have enough time on this topic because there's so many things that pop up on this one subject on its own. But I just want to focus this one particularly on the fact that, we've seen the violence, Levi. There's students that are now demanding amnesty for the students that are arrested. I mean, what's going to happen to those students that are in jail? The exams are coming up. People are supposed to graduate. I mean, what happens in the interim?
Maybe we need to start a little bit back and look at what Zamikaya was saying. In the early 90s, there was a consensus in South Africa that talked about the transformation of higher education. And a lot of us were supposed to play a meaningful role in that project. And we must actually accept that most of those that were given responsibilities to run tertiary institutions did not do their best in order to transform higher education. But then also at the same time, when you look at the issue of those students that are arrested, it's quite difficult to mix these issues because you have got legal issues that must run. If you have done something wrong, you get arrested. And obviously, it becomes difficult for the universities to get involved in dealing with legal matters. I was listening to the spokesperson of VETS who was saying, VETS did not arrest the students. Students are arrested by the police. And obviously, you need to leave the legal processes to run its course. Because criminal activities
are subject to prosecution.
And we must just leave the law enforcement agencies to do their work. But also, there is a view that is coming from students that is saying that student leaders are being targeted by the police, and this is
to
actually
destabilize the protest.
Yes, and this is actually a political move to destabilize this.
Do you think there's any truth in that, Mazekane?
Well, the point that I want to make, of course, that threat to suppress the students is there. Because once you deploy private security, police, maybe before we know it, they will deploy the army. So now the situation is untenable. You can't teach, even if you're an academic, in the state of emergency of the 80s. But I think here we need to find the thinking in terms of judiciary. I was reading a report last week that 5 of those students, out of those who are arrested, 5 are not even registered at VETS. It then begins to show that within this movement there are criminal elements who are an integral part of this movement. Yeah. So let the judiciary sift those who are not registered either at UJ or the nearest universities, VETS. Once they identify those, let the law take its course. But in Mkhwebo's case, I would argue that if he has to write exams, they can grant him a bail, allow him to write his exams, and then he will continue with his trial in January, February. But that's why I'm saying the judiciary here, they must also help us in resolving this impasse. If Mkhwebo is supposed to write exam, give him a bail. You can't lock him in jail whilst there are talks of starting exams from the 7th of September. But if the 5 which were also arrested in the process are not registered anyway, then lock those ones in jail.
A very quick one, Levi. I'm sorry, I got into you there. You were still making your point.
Yes, indeed. There is an element now of some individuals or non-students that are actually participating in this exercise. You'll recall, Alicia, that last year when this movement started, it was students themselves. They never mentioned political parties. Yeah. They were all united on the cause. And when some political parties started to get involved, the nature started to change, and students said, we don't want political parties in this exercise. We are on our own as students. And I think we have got very brilliant ideas that are coming from non-students. Please allow the students to fight their cause on their own. And if you are not a registered student, please don't get involved, because it actually tarnishes the entire initiative of the students. And now there are people that are saying, look, your leaders are not even students, are not even registered. Why are you not going to school? Because you're being led by non-students. And I think that actually frustrates the entire exercise. Good ideas are coming from non-students, but please allow the students to work on their own. And I know they can be very successful.
All right, that's where we're going to leave it. Unfortunately, gentlemen, we've run out of time. It's time for another quick ad break. And after that, do the Hawks have a leg to stand on with investigating Trevor Manuel? Find out after this break. This is Madonsela.
News Today provide news updates giving a wealth of knowledge. Breaking stories and crossing live for you. We follow business developments intensely. Experts and analysts tackle all challenging issues for you. We cover stories locally and abroad to keep you informed. We cover all sporting codes just for you. We are sure to give you weather to be ready for the day. Stay tuned to News Today at 3 p.m. from Monday to Friday on SABC News.
We're back with Media Monitor after a story surfaced on Thursday that the Hawks were probing former Finance Minister Trevor Manuel, as reported by the Citizen newspaper on Friday. Spokesperson Hangwane Mlaudzi refuted the story. He did, however, confirm that a dossier was submitted by Jimmy Manyi of the so-called Decolonization Foundation, claiming that Manuel, while he was Minister of Finance, approved a modernization tender without following due processes. Gentlemen, what do you make of these latest developments? Levi, let's start with you.
Well, with this one, you also get mixed reactions, and that's why you hear some people saying this maybe it's political, maybe there's something a bit that makes people to be uncomfortable. Firstly, Manuel is one of those that is very bold enough to talk against the current administration. And now, obviously, when you get this kind of stories coming up now, that's why you'll get this kind of reactions that are coming from people. But also at the same time, South Africa has made a bold statement to say we are against corruption and we're going to ensure that we deal with people that participate in corrupt activities. And indeed, if something wasn't done in a proper manner, you will actually need the former minister, Trevor Manuel himself, to come out clean and assist South Africans in providing all the necessary information.
Yeah, speaking of information, I know Jimmy Manyi says he's handed the dossier. We still don't know what's contained in that dossier.
Alicia, let me start with, I think Jimmy Manyi's actions are worrisome.
Why?
I really do not understand his agenda. The decolonization project that he's heading of foundation, I still have to understand its vision and mission. Because you can't have an entity which continues to harm an organization. Because these are ANC, let's assume that is one of those tried and tested cadres of the ANC. Irrespective of the differences that they have, you can't continue to do that in your well-owned comrades or colleagues. The fundamental question that we have to resolve here is, what is his agenda? And unfortunately, if you look at this now, whatever he does, it feeds into these factional fights. You'd struggle to see him as an objective player in this whole thing. And once again, you look at the Hawks. I'm not sure whether the cadre which they deployed as the head of Hawks is someone who understands the role of national security versus the economic situation in the country.
Yeah.
And to me, I'm saying, you look at these cadres, in Tlemeza, I don't know his background, Jimmy Manyi, I don't know his background, but really, if they are tried and tested cadres or responsible citizens, you can't continue on a path where you just fuel diesel and oil in a situation which is very, very fragile. So I don't have all the details, I don't know, but really I'm worried about his agenda, vision and mission of that decolonization project. To me, it doesn't assist this nation in building that we are trying to achieve. It doesn't assist us in this stability that we want politically and economically. Right now, the rating agencies are waiting for us. In November, they will make an pronouncement based on some of these things. So the question is, if they knew about this when Trevor was still serving, why were they not brave enough to challenge him at that particular point? Now you've got Pravin, you've got Trevor. Who knows? Maybe they will run after Trevor's deputy, or So to me, I really don't understand their own agenda.
I think another aspect, Alicia, that is a bit worrying in South Africa is that, with prominent people, the leaders of these institutions will always start with the media. You will get these leaders of the Ipid and so on and so on, going straight in, briefing the media and providing the details. And I think there seems to be an element of wanting to embarrass certain individuals, to say, you have been talking too much, now we've got something against you, in order to shut you down. And I think that is a bit unfair. But also at the same time, we also need not to protect those that seem to have been committing criminal activities. If you have signed off a tender and didn't follow due processes. That is not acceptable in South Africa, and something must be done. But it's also worrying indeed that the manner in which things are being done in South Africa, it's quite worrying. These investigations can still be done very silently, not having gone out to the media. Look at what these tendencies or this behavior is actually destroying our finance minister today. Because you would have leaders of these institutions going to a media briefing for almost an hour, providing details that are actually supposed to be done in court. I think that is a bit unacceptable and unfair, especially to people that served the nation with utmost dedication.
I think, Alicia, I like the point that he's making. If Trevor has a case to answer, he must answer indeed. But what worries me most is the strategies and tactics which are employed to get at that particular conclusion. And once again, you have to understand the agendas. The decolonization project might be a neo-colonization project, in my view. So if we're not careful, because whether you like it or not, we are part of the African continent. And we have seen, if you have time, read Walter Rodney's popular book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. If you understand the plight of Africa, we had the first decade of civil wars in Africa, military coups. So when you talk about democratic consolidation in Africa, it is these things like this which threaten that democracy, because this instability speaks to that language of the 60s of military coups. We are lucky that our people are not assassinated, killed, or we don't experience, but that's why I'm worried, there is a recipe for disaster here if we are not careful. So it's sad. But if there is a case to be answered, let him answer that. But I'm worried about the digging.
But gentlemen, we've got so many judicial bodies and Chapter 9 institutions that deal with corruption, your corruption watch bodies and all of them. And isn't that, maybe that's the same initiative that decolonization project is actually focusing on. Are we saying that then these cases shouldn't be brought against those so-called important people or famous people?
I think, Alicia,
what is the argument here,
I think, Alicia, let's conceptualize properly. This decolonization process. I was saying earlier that the students alone cannot adopt this reductionist higher education approach when it comes to decolonization. It's a project in totality which must deal with our economic legacy. As South Africa, we're an enclaved economy which has links and leanings to the British economic system, the American economic system. So we have to deal with those. You look at our cultural values, for instance. The kind of music that our children are exposed to is totally different from the liberating music that we were exposed to in the 60s. So when you talk about decolonization, you can't solely deal with exposing the scandals, but decolonization, the transformation of this economy. Earlier we were talking about the mining sector, we're talking about higher education. So the decolonization project, in my view, it should be an integral part of the second phase of our economic and liberation struggle. So it can't deal with isolated issues, whilst as a nation we're facing serious issues of neocolonialism.
All right. Well, that's where we leave it on that matter. Gentlemen, let's move on to our next story, where the rift between Ipid head Robert McBride and Police Minister Nathi Nhleko is evident after the Police Minister lashed out at the Speaker of Parliament, Baleka Mbete, over the handling of his request for McBride to face a disciplinary hearing. McBride has, however, returned to his job after having been suspended for 16 months. What are the ripple effects of the squabble, gentlemen? Levi, let's start with you.
Well, I think, in South Africa, we've got a lot of processes. And with this kind of senior positions at times, you'll then realize that there are tensions that will develop amongst those that are up on top there. And obviously, when one has to go back to his position, where there is a clear rift between...
How are they going to work?
It becomes quite difficult for these people to be able to work together. And that's why sometimes people in HR will talk about the breakdown of personal relations. That will not make the institution or the department to function properly. And but also at the same time, I think here we're dealing with adults who must actually put the interests of South Africa first and ensure that we actually get the services that is actually required. I know it can't be a very easy thing to do, but this is the situation that we're faced with. They must actually leave their differences aside and ensure that they serve South Africa.
You know, just to quote something that the police minister said here, he said the working relationship between him and McBride is irretrievable and it's broken. I mean, what can we expect then going forward in terms of
Alicia, what saddens is that I'll go back to this liberation history. We can't escape it. As a young activist, I was inspired by Robert McBride, an MAK combatant. And when you see these, your top deployees, because the minister is also a deployee, and you wonder whether the ANC has a strategy of deploying its leaders and debriefing them. Because once you are in these institutions, as he's correctly saying, you have to make sure that you forget about your liberation heritage, but you embrace the South African nation, because these are democratic institutions which are part of the state. But when you see a minister and a former cadre of the movement, fighting it all out in such a way, then you begin to get worried about the nature or the strategy of the ANC to deploy its own cadres. It's clear, in my view, they don't brief them, because some of these comrades, they are always at each other's throat. It's like, it's an EFF or ANC minister, and yet they are from the same organization, and I hope they will be able to reconcile, at least at a political and ideological level, and understand that they have a responsibility to contribute to the building of this nation.
Wow, let's leave it there and quickly move on to our final story now. The new public protector advocate Busisiwe Mkhwebane is sure to set her foot on the ground. This was evident during the Parliament's Justice Portfolio Committee, where she was briefing the committee on Madonsela's last year in office. She threw shade at former public protector that donor funding would be a thing of the past in her term, and that they will do away with sensational headlines referring to Madonsela's secure in comfort, just to mention a few. Mkhwebane also said that she would abandon the use of consultants as far as possible. Now, the media is lapping this up. They're saying there's some new breeding animosity or hostility between the two. What do you think, Liva?
Well, Alicia, I think one must indicate that the former public protector did quite a wonderful job. And I think all of us in South Africa are saying, now that we've got a new public protector, this person must quickly fit into the shoe of the previous one and ensure that everything runs smoothly. But I think we've also been a bit unfair to the new public protector, because we need to give her space to be able to do her job properly. And I don't think she's supposed to emulate Madonsela. She must be herself, but more importantly, she must serve the interests of all South Africans, especially while she's in that office.
Zamikai, last word.
I fully agree. The Thuli Madonsela yardstick is very unfair. I like the point Gwede made yesterday, that she must not behave like a star. We have to judge on how she handles this report and many other investigations that are to be followed. So let's give her a chance, but she must act responsibly as well.
Zabekaya, as well as Mr. Levi, joining me here on Media Monitor for a robust debate here on Media Monitor this morning. Thank you so much for joining us. We are back here at 9 o'clock next week, Sunday, on SABC News. I'm Alicia Jali. Your AM news are coming up next. As for me, I'll see you tomorrow at 3 p.m. for News Today. This is SABC News. Do have a great Sunday further.
constantly moving, constantly changing. The Alexandria Dunefield system is extremely dynamic, with sand being continually blown in, building up and traversing inland. Some 375,000 cubic tons of sand is deposited into the dune fields each year. It's the largest and least degraded coastal dune field in the southern hemisphere.
Well, we couldn't have chosen a better day to see sand in motion. Often described as a sea of sand, the Alexandria Dune Field is approximately 80 kilometers long, about 4.5 kilometers wide at its widest areas, and it covers a total distance of about 15,500 hectares. It is continuously changing throughout the seasons,